Hi everyone, David here. This week, I've broken up a conversation I had with my good friend, Mr. Eddie Speed, the founder and CEO of Colonial Funding Group and also NoteSchool. Eddie and I go back over 40 years. We started in real estate investing at about the same time in 1980, and we have coursed together through these decades. The conversation we had was where are we in the market today, what's going on with the mortgage industry, applications, housing, overall real estate. Eddie's got a multitude of areas that he can bring expertise to the table, and he gives us a lot of relevant data so we can make decisions going forward. This week, you'll hear the first part of the conversation. Next week, we'll pick it up with the second part where we'll start with the loan origination saga, how the underwriting for deal flow and investments has changed. Who are you investing with, the promoter or the operator? That's a big one. We'll talk about warning signs and also opportunities ahead, and the fact that who you know is very important. Enjoy week one with Mr. Eddie Speed, focusing on the cash flow. Good day, everyone. This is Dr. David Phelps of the Freedom Founders Mastermind Community and the Dentist Freedom Blueprint Podcast. Hey, today I'm going to have a fun conversation and probably very, very relevant to where we are in the market cycle with my good friend, Mr. Eddie Speed. Eddie, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Dr. Phelps. How are you?
It's always great to see you. Eddie, you often say to people that you converse with, and we'll get into a little bit more of your background and what you do, but you are an educator, if not, a boots on the ground, fingers in the pulse of the real estate market. We're going to get into the depth of that today. But you often say to people, not my first rodeo. And that's a cliche that a lot of people say, but you actually were in the rodeo. I could say that, but I was never in the rodeo. My rodeo is not a real rodeo. My rodeo is different than yours. So let me give a little bit of background, and this will help people kind of get where we're going. Eddie actually grew up around horses, but in 1980, he learned that there's more wealth to be built with a pencil than a rope. That's when his father-in-law, a pioneer in seller finance notes, taught Eddie the ropes of the note business. The note business. We'll get into what that is. We'll define that. Eddie has been perfecting his craft ever since, introducing creative innovations that have changed the way note investing is done. He is the nation's most experienced note buyer. He has closed over 50,000 note deals. He launched NoteSchool in 2000, where anyone can learn the art of creative financing for performing and non-performing discounted mortgage notes. He's the owner and president of Colonial Funding Group, which acquires and brokers discounted real estate secured notes, and he's a principal in a family of private equity funds that acquire bulk note portfolios. We'll put the links to where people can contact you, Eddie, but you're on Facebook with the NoteSchool and your website, noteschool.com. We'll put all that in the notes for folks. But let's go back a little bit. 1980, when we reflected back, when you and I have talked before, that was when I bought my first rental investment property. Now, I bought a property, and that's what we call equity ownership. And that's usually the way most people think about investing in real estate, particularly people want to go out and do it themselves. You buy rental properties, right? That's tried and true. And there's, like everything in life, there's pros and cons to that. If you get into it, if you get systematized, if you can find good management or you do it yourself, there's a pathway to get there. But you're one that fortunately, early on in my career of investing and building my wealth outside of Wall Street on Main Street, which is what we're talking about here today, you turned me on to the art of financing and how important and a whole nother world of investing and creating wealth and cash flow, which is what really this is all about. It's about the cash flow. We talk about growth, and that's great, but the cash flow that we're looking for, and you taught me, along with, again, thousands of others, the art of creative financing, and that's the route you took on. You've never been so much of a person who really wanted to be a landlord. I guess you never had the thrill of like, writing and trying to rope tenants. I guess that wasn't part of your skill set there. But there's a convergence or a complementary action between equity and debt financing. In this case, we're talking about owning the debt. Most people think about, well, when there's debt or financing, most people think about, well, I'm borrowing the money to buy a house or buying the money to buy a rental property or getting financing to buy a business. That's a liability. We're talking about here to be an investor in the debt. And then the whole arena of today, what you and I and many others would call creative financing, is something that goes along with market cycles. And we're in a turn of the market cycle now where creative financing is coming back into play in a big time. And of course, you've been through numerous cycles of this. You've seen it play out. Again, not your first rodeo. You've seen it before. You know what's coming. You have a good sense of that. So I'm going to back off a little bit and let you give some definitions of what you do. And maybe it's also give us a little bit of lay of the land as what you see in the general overall marketplace. Then we'll get down to some specifics. And I know you brought a lot of good data for us today, Eddie. So let me let you jump in and take it from there.
Yeah, so David, it's, I started in the business, I was 20 years old, so you and I were young in that era when we were stumbling out there doing that, and probably had more willingness to take a chance than we did knowledge of what chance we were taking. But it turned out okay, right?
Right.
I got really lucky. My father-in-law was a true pioneer in the seller finance world. He was an old fireman. So he was the kind of the millionaire next door fireman, kind of guy. And he had learned about seller financing some of his rental properties, and then met up with a guy that became his partner, and they were buying seller finance notes. People were forced to seller finance in 1980 because of interest rates.
Well, let's take people back there. What were interest rates in 1980? I know what they were. You know what they were, but just give people a sense, because people think interest rates are all of a sudden they're really high right now, right?
Yeah, they were really about 18%. There may have been a period where they actually got up over 20, but they were really about 17, 18% interest. That's what it cost to go get a mortgage at the bank. I mean, like a traditional 30-year FHA loan, boom, 18% interest. Yeah. And so people were forced to carry seller financing because that's the only way you could make financing affordable. And so that was the first use of seller financing where it became so widespread. Now, seller financing has been around for centuries, right? It's not like it was just invented, but it became very widespread and a lot of people did it. And we would then come in and buy those notes. We would let them cash out, because people were getting payments over time and maybe they needed a lump sum of cash.
So let me back you up and make sure I've got this clear. So what you're saying is back in that era when you and I got started and interest rates were as high as 18, maybe 20%, the inability of buyers to be able to go to the bank and get that mortgage for 18%, it wasn't viable. I mean, it didn't make sense. Exactly. So you still have a marketplace where people they need to sell a property. There's always reasons why people need to sell, job locations, family issues, whatever, they need to sell. And traditionally we think about, people go to the bank to get their financing and then the seller gets cashed out. They get their equity in cash because the bank provides the financing. So you're talking about a time period in a market cycle when the affordability factor, the ability for buyers to obtain the financing wasn't viable. And so now sellers, in order to get a transaction done, to make the move that they want to make, that they would do seller financing, which means they would sell their equity on terms and carry back financing and receive those payments just like the bank would receive. Maybe they wanted cash, but they couldn't get the cash. So next best thing was, we'll be the bank and we'll sell the property and get a down payment like a bank would, and then we'll carry back the financing. And so now they're receiving payments like a bank, but you're saying that you kind of help make a market for people who were carrying that financing back, the sellers, so that if they wanted to get a lump sum of cash, which is what maybe that someone wanted or needed, they could do so. Is that correct?
That's it.
Okay.
I mean, we basically would buy those future cash flows at a discount, and we'd pay cash today. Naturally, you'd buy them at a discount, right? Because
why do you say naturally?
Well, because it's present value of future dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So a question might be, David, if I agreed to pay you, we'll use a big enough number that actually makes somebody think, right?
Okay.
$1,000. If I agreed to pay you $1,000 today, or $2,000 in 10 years, now that's 50 cents on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Which one would you take? And even you, Dr. Phelps, would have to think about that for a minute. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's $2,000 sounds great, but then I'm thinking 10 years, the lost opportunity where I could take that 1,000 a day and probably through some business or some other transaction or just investing it wisely, I could probably in 10 years do better than just doubling it. So that's what I'm thinking. Is that Is that a correct way to look at it?
$1,000 a day mathematically probably would be better, because it's not to wait 10 years, the return on the waiting, the cost of the money, right? If you just think in terms of, if you bought a CD today for $1,000 and in 10 years it matured and it's worth 2,000, the interest rate on that CD would not be that much. I mean, call it maybe, 5.5% interest. So mathematically, that's what you and I know how to do, is just calculate that number. But when you think about it, like, would somebody really take 50% of the money now in cash versus 100% of the money later? And the answer is, well, I bought 50,000 notes with people willing to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, there's always a need and a motivation. And of course, we couldn't get into it today, but there's a lot of ways to slice and dice that so that you can, give them a certain amount of cash now to solve a problem, and reduce the amount of the discount and that kind of thing. That's the fun of this. And again, we can't get into it today, but that's what you teach and show. And what I want people to understand from you, which we'll get into a little bit more as we talk today, is how creative financing, whether you're buyer or seller, can make the transactions possible in a market today where things are being slowed down tremendously. And I think we're going to see more of that. Let's pull it back up a little bit for a second. And because you're so dialed in, you have to be dialed in to what's going on in the marketplace, in real estate, the overall economy. Let's talk about the overall economy, or as it pertains to real estate, and give us some data points, because everybody wants to know, well, where's this going? Are we going into a recession? We're seeing the tipping point where in certain markets, housing equity values, commercial, is coming down. We're hearing about rents are softening. Again, every market's different. Give us some data points, because you're very plugged into this.
Yeah, I think first of all, we like it. My team, my executive team, has been deeply involved in. They've worked for big box shops, so they've done billions of dollars worth of business. I've been a smaller operator. I've done hundreds of millions, right? Which is a lot for my business. The most, I think, probably around of any independent operator, but they've done billions because they work for big institutions. And so they're used to studying this stuff. And we really like it and have gotten into it. And then I have some friends that, work for the big institutions now. I have a very close friend that has about 30 billion under management. And so they, I don't go to Facebook and find out what interest rates are going to do. I try to call my friends that pay like millions of dollars for analytics.
Right.
That's all. That might be a better answer, right? But the bottom line is, I think we've reached a point, and this is kind of a national story. So, David, that may not fit exactly the market that somebody's living in.
Right.
We've reached a real estate recession, I think, is a fair statement. Now there's micro markets that may not be true, and it may not become true. But if you look at what we call Denver and West, it's definitely been a big truth. Western, and I think you and I are in Dallas-Fort Worth, and we're thinking, oh, we're insulated. Or we're in Atlanta, we're insulated. And the answer is, statistics say that's not true. The bottom line is this: we had a real estate market that was driven by crazy factors. It wasn't, honestly, David, I don't think it was a real market.
No, I agree. Not at all. So many factors. We've had historically, I mean, for thousands of years, historically low interest rates in the last decade. Cheap money, where leverage, the ability to go out and use leverage at very low interest rates, has allowed people to pour money into equities all across the board. Well, stock market equities, real estate equities, pushing the prices up. So we've had that benefit. And of course, we've had the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, again, coming out of 2008 and stimulus there, and the quantitative easing that they've had in the bond market. Well, that just got ramped up on steroids in the last, 3 years, going back to when COVID started. And so now you've got this flush of money in place, low interest rates, and well, what could go wrong there?
Well, you had low interest rates and a lack of inventory. People didn't want to sell their house because they didn't want them walking through it, or they were scared to do something different. They didn't know what was going to happen next, or they then all of a sudden houses started going up in value and people had nowhere to go. My wife and I, perfect situation. I mean, we put our house on the market and then we started really digging around about where we were going to move. And, then all of a sudden she said, well, I don't want to go live in half the house I'm living in now for 2 years, just because we're, quote, in the business and we try to make good personal decisions.
Right.
So we all kind of live in some of that, right? So the answer is, when rates started going up, then the unaffordability factor started taking a grip. And it was just as simple as rates going up. That's what's tripped the switch. And rates have doubled in a year.
Mm-hmm.
We were at about 3, and now we're at about 6. Now, David, that's what you sign the note, and it says that's not the effective interest rate. The APR, which is the effective interest rate, is more about 7 to 7.5. Mm-hmm. So, and then so now we're at an affordability factor. Now, 7.5% interest, David, is about normal over a last 40-year period.
Right. Right.
So that's average. That's normal. And there's statistics and everything I'm saying. If I've given you a number, it's not. I didn't just make it up. Right. I mean, we can support it with multiple data sources.
Yeah, that's a normal interest rate, or as you said, average over the 40 years. I think it was 7.78%. Was the average, right? So we're in that normal period. The problem is there's always a lag effect in the equity market in terms of the time it takes for values to come into some kind of equilibrium with that, quote, new normal interest rate. And so that there's a discrepancy. You can say, well, yeah, 7% effective rate, that's pretty normal. What's the problem? Well, because we've had this big boost in asset prices and they haven't come down. So the affordability factor is there until something gives. Either rates go back down some or values come down. But again, to your point, people can't afford to transact and go to the bank and get mortgages to buy houses that they would have assumed that they wanted to purchase.
Yeah. So, Mortgage Bankers Association and National Association of Realtors and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all these different sources, when you look at their numbers, they're all fairly close to the same. And, Mortgage Banker says, okay, we have an affordability factor today buying a house because values went up and now rates have gone up, and now what the effective payment is. Right. We have an affordability factor that we haven't had since it's been worse, David, was 1985. And so that's a truth. And so it goes back to this. It goes back to the story in the 80s. Now, David, you can either sell your house for this price and carry owner financing. Right. Or you can sell your house for this price and get cash, right, discount. Right. Because it all equates to the same thing. I could go borrow money at the bank at 18%, but if you'll loan it to me at 10, I can pay you more money.
Exactly.
That's what furniture companies do, right?
Sure.
So that's it's the world concept, and what's caused it is as simple as this. And of course, we see the Fed, tapping the brakes some on raising rates, but they not stop raising rates. Mm-hmm. And because of inflation, of course. And the Fed rate, of course, is the rate that they charge to loan banks the money. It's not exactly tied to 30-year mortgage rates, but there is definitely a correlation. Right. We see these little dips in the market, where mortgage rates will go down a little bit, and you and I can't open Facebook that rates drop for 1/4 point, and everybody acts like it's over. It's all good again. And
I think that's what the market and everybody hopes, right? I mean, I think we see so much of that right now. It's like people are saying, well, yeah, it is over. The Fed's going to kind of take the foot off the accelerator on the interest rates, and it's all going to go back to where it was. And there's just too many variables out there. And I'm never a pessimist. I'm a realist. You and I both know that being a realist means you look at what's out there, and you're always hedging. We have to hedge. And I think that's what you're really good at, hedging. Nobody knows exactly where the market's going to go. We don't know if something could cause liquidity, really a great liquidity crisis, which again could change everything. Well, what could that be? It could be anything, globally. It doesn't have to be something here in this country. It just could trigger it to happen. We just don't know. But there's so many variables, and I think too the thing we have to look at where things are different today than they were in 1980 is the sovereign debt this country has. We're at 31 trillion plus. Yeah. So these movements of interest rates, people go, well, it's only a few interest rate points. You're talking about back in the 80s, you were up at 18. What's the big deal? The big deal is the relative increase in rates from a Fed funds rate of essentially zero back in March of last year to now, 4.5, probably going to 5, maybe 5.25. Well, that's a 500% increase, 500%. Put that against the debt that is being carried not just by our nation, by our government, but by corporations. There's zombie companies out there that just have relied on the cheap interest rates to keep rolling their debt over and over, and consumers, their debt's up. So we've got so many factors at play, and I know you're very good at looking at all those variables. I mean, that's what you and your team do, is you look at all these variables to assess where you sit in the marketplace. But there's a lot going on here that one has to look at before you can kind of prognosticate where you're going to position yourself, in the market for what you do and what you invest in.
Mortgage interest rates, and think of just the consumer, the residential mortgage loan, lending people money to buy a house or maybe buy a rental, and we all think in terms of what the most prevalent lender out there are government-backed entities, what we call agency loans, right? Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae. And Ginnie Mae, of course, is FHA, VA. So those represent about 70% of all of the loans originated in that market. The other loans there are other loans that 30% represents. And typically those are loans that don't qualify for these standards. In fact, there's a government name for them. It's called non-QM loans, non-qualified mortgages. So that's kind of the subprime. And but here's the thing, David. Mid-January, the Fed comes along, and the Fed being Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. The FHA hasn't taken this position yet, but they will. They've said, you're not pricing loans at a safety level that's good for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac relative to the market. They call it loan level pricing. So they make an announcement and they say, we are going to adjust loan level pricing, and it ain't adjusting down. And so the truth of the matter is that we've been knowing that had to come. You and I've discussed this offline. I mean, I've got friends that run, big shops where they do make mortgages and they sell them into mortgage-backed securities. And they were selling these loans, David, at like 107, 108 cents. Wow. This time last year, they were selling them at that much money. Now all of a sudden they're selling them for 100 cents, 101 cents. Okay. And so the mortgage rates that they were writing on the loans, while we thought they were terrible because they were double what they were, truth of the matter is they weren't high enough. And so when people start, get all excited because, they open the newspaper, or they open Facebook, and somebody's got some hot sports opinion about mortgage rates and stuff, the data doesn't take us to the conclusion that rates are going down. It's just there's not any people that, as you and I refer to, people that make the $1 billion bets, they're not betting that. Mm-hmm. And that's basically where we are. So I think Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stepping in 1st of 2023 and really making that statement. And guess when those rates are going to start being that loan level pricing, which they really control what you can originate the loan at, right? Even though you're the lender, you're going to move it through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. They have some control.
Yeah, you have to follow their guidelines if you're going to have any place to put your product. Yeah.
Here's the thing. They're going to implement this. The announcement also said they're going to implement this in during the buying season.
So coming up here, what's that typically?
March,
April, spring,
March through July or something like that.
So this announcement will take place and actually hit the ground, hit the marketplace during that spring season coming up. Is that, so do you sense that that's going to be priced in before then, or is that just a situation where all of a sudden you're going to see rates tick back
I think it's
up?
a little bit like the Fed chair when they're like, it's coming, it's coming.
Mhm.
You know, I think it's some of that. You know, they know the market reacts seemingly better when they kind of know it's coming.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
they're going to make the adjustments accordingly. And of course, underwriting is really tough.
Yes.
Right? People don't realize this. We did a little extra data scraping. We scrape a lot of data every week, but I have a guy that works with us, and he is, in fact, he used to work for a guy that, you know, Mr. Stack, and he was kind of the analytics guy for him. And, you know, he was really good at analytics.
Right.
And this guy now works with us and has for several years, and he's really good at this stuff. He's just one of these super smart guys. He like gets up and reads Mortgage Underwriter for an hour every day to get his day started. Now, that wouldn't be me, but he does do that.
Got it.
Seriously, he does. And so so one of the things that we started really looking at is not only is there a price in credit, but there's a credit crunch. And we've talked about this on your show before, the mortgage availability index for the virus is at about 185. And that's just a measure they've developed. Now it's right about 100. It ended the year at 103. So call it, you know, 45% of the people that could get a mortgage before the virus can't get one
Can't
now.
do it now. Yeah.
David, guess what this number has trended to over the last 6 months. The amount of people that make a loan application versus amount of people gets accepted. The industry term for that is called the pull-through rate, right? Or it's how many make an application and how many close. 50%.
And in normal market conditions, that would be
Call it 25, call it 20% of rejection rate.
Okay, rejection rate.
Meaning 80% of them
80%.
close.
Right.
And so,
okay.
so now all of a sudden we're so not only is loan production down literally 70%, literally, but now, you know, they're working on half the files they work on won't close. Hard to make money on deals you can't close, right, David?
Exactly.
And
so, yeah, go ahead.
So this is all kind of leading up to, you know, what we're saying, which is people, their income or the income that is allowed that they can credit, and many other underwriting factors are causing all these people to do a loan application that finds out they all wasted their time and it wouldn't close. And this then leads us into the big loan origination saga.
All right, that concludes the first section of the conversation with Eddie Speed. Next week, we'll go to part 2. We'll talk about the loan origination saga, how underwriting has changed, who are you investing with, a promoter or an operator, and the warning signs ahead, but also the opportunities. See you next week. Enjoy the conversation then.